Please welcome director Oliver Hermanus and the incomparable Bill Nighy. Thanks for making it. Oh, thank you. I should have said the international treasure, Bill Nighy. Bill, when I introduced the film, I said that Kazuo Ishiguro tailored this role for you. He wrote the script for you in mind as a showcase. Can you tell us how that happened and how did you feel about Kazuo developing the script with you in mind?
Well, I felt like I must have been very, very good in a previous life. Because what did I do to deserve this? Yeah, I was thrilled, and he's a great friend of Stephen Woolley, the producer of this film, who I've worked with 3 times, and he's the most remarkable man. And he came to England when he was 5 years old, and he was introduced to the Kurosawa film when he was around 12 years old, and it was a big deal for him, and it made a great impression on him. The kind of the suggestion being that you could have a significant and important life without, world domination. You know what I mean? And things Japanese were very important to him. And he always then wanted to. And he and Stephen, they're film weirdos. They've seen everything. And they sit across dinner tables shouting film facts at one another, 1947,
We're
who directed it?
We're known as cinephiles, not film weirdos. Or film geeks, not film weirdos.
But you can be a cinephile and be weird. But I know what you mean. I nearly said cineast, but then that sounded slightly unseemly. But anyway, but yeah, and he wanted to marry the original film with that kind of the extremity of English manners in the 1950s, and they thought of me. So,
And we're just reaping the benefits of that because it's your best performance. It's quite an incomparable showcase. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Oliver, I love your films previous to this. Were you daunted about the idea of taking on an adaptation of Ikiru, which is a classic unto itself?
Yes, it was. Yes, it's a very strange pitch when somebody says, "Hey, do you want to remake a Kurosawa?" And you always go, "Oof." And then they go, well, it's with, Kazuo Ishiguro wrote the screenplay. And then I was like, oh, goodness, that might be even more scary to work with Ish. And then they're like, Bill Nighy will play the lead. It's like, oof, okay. It's getting even more stressful. But it was wonderful because I met Ishiguro and Stephen Woolley, our producer. I was interrogated one day at the BFI in London.
About being a weirdo?
About being a
film weirdo?
Totally. Ishiguro was like, what is your favorite movie from the 1940s? And then the 1950s and the 1960s. And then he supplied me with a lot of... He was a real feeder, because Ishiguro and Stephen are cinephiles, weirdos. And so I don't compete with him. I don't think Bill does either. We sort of just sit there quietly. But he fed me a lot of stuff. He really wanted to, because we all got locked up in COVID, so I went back to South Africa, and this massive box of DVDs arrived from England, from Kazuo Ishiguro, and it was just this huge collection of stuff from the 30s, from Ealing Studios and from Germany, many of them that I had sort of seen at film school and was sort of reintroduced to through Ishiguro's kind of imagination, and then we would spend hundreds of hours on Zoom because I sort of wanted to get my teeth into the screenplay for about 6 months. And then Bill and I would talk, and he would be in a garden somewhere in the middle of England during COVID. And then when the world opened up again, we started shooting.
But Oliver, you you pay homage to the Ealing Studios cinemas, but you make it your own at the same time. Can you tell us about navigating that aspect of?
It was this thing of not wanting, I'm from South Africa, and I'd sort of grown up with a lot of the work that our distributor here, Michael Barker, who's an extraordinary man, has made, and I was sort of coming to this project going, what do I have to bring to this, and how do I make this something that's not necessarily mine, but in a way my version of England or my understanding of it. So I watched a lot of things that I didn't like. A lot of things I didn't like, and things like Downton Abbey, which I'm sure people like here. But I watched a lot of Downton Abbey because I'd never seen it before, and I was like, okay, that's what we're not gonna rhythmically do. And then I watched things that I really loved, like Gosford Park, and I watched Merchant Ivory films, and of course Ish's film, The Remains of the Day. So it was about trying to interrogate and then just break all the rules. And then I must say that our team on Living is extraordinary. Our cinematographer is somebody I've worked with many times before, Jamie Ramsey.
Wonderful.
And the great Sandy Powell. And Helen Scott and Nadia Stacey, and they, working with Sandy was amazing because she also has this massive knowledge. And one of the best things about working with Sandy was that she said to me at the very first day, she was like, "I know you're the director, but I will choose all of the background extras." And I said to her, "Why is that?" She's like, "Because I understand 50s faces, and I'm sure you might have an understanding of them, but I will be better at choosing them than you are." And so I would get all the pictures and I would choose, and then I would sort of say, "Please make sure Sandy Powell has seen all of them." And then they said to me, "She's already seen them. You're seeing her choices."
Bill, your character has so much stoic restraint. Was that enjoyable from an actor's point of view to, mumble? I mean, at the beginning it was like,
how dare you?
No, not mumble. It's like, oh my God, at the beginning we barely can hear him. Tell us about navigating that character.
I know, I kept waiting. I mean, I've said it before, Oliver knows that, when we talked about the character, until you speak on the first day, you don't really know what's going to happen. And I thought I'd risk it, and it just came out. I kept waiting for the sound man to come up and say, "Really?" Is this how it's going to be? But nobody did, so I just kept going. But yeah, no, it is fun. It's actually a kind of fun to play somebody that uptight. It is kind of my area of expertise. If they're looking, if you're looking for anybody who's disabled by self-consciousness and and self-doubt and is.
But he's also a very decent man, which is like rare to see a leading role, with somebody who's so kind and.
Yeah, it's not always the devil gets the best jokes, they say. I have played a couple of decent people. And it is, and they say, what is it? They say happiness writes white, the poets say. And it is, but I kind of dig it. And it's, the mechanics of having to express quite a lot with not very much is it's exciting. It gets to be fun, and I'm a fan of all that uptight kind of, what's called Englishness. But I'm sure they have characters like Mr. Williams in every culture in the world. But we always get the blame. I know it's unhealthy, and I'm sure psychiatrically it's disastrous, to be that repressed. But I also find it kind of funny, and there's a touch of heroism in there. It gets preposterous when you have to apologize for dying.
And you do that. Oliver, in this adaptation, the character of Peter is different from Ichiro, where we get to know more about Peter, the character, the younger character. Can you tell us about the importance in this adaptation to have Peter be a bigger role?
It was definitely, it was a decision when Ish started writing the first draft as well to to sort of lens it through Peter in a more clear way. And what, you know, there's a detail at the start of the film, which is we literally open on a young boy reading a comic. And, you know, Mr. Williams references this idea of being a young kid on the station watching the men go to work. But the reality of that story is that's what Ishiguro used to do as a young boy. It was sort of that, I cast a very ginger young kid, but it should have been Kazuo Ishiguro. And so it was all about, this is Peter's first day of work, and we were starting the film through Peter. And I remember when I got to the point of having to find how I was going to start the film, I think having watched all these movies and, you know, really getting into it, I was like, okay, we're just going to do the big title sequence. I'm not going to be afraid. And we said, how big can the text get on the screen? I'll just go all the way. And then found this piece of music. It was this Peter's piece of music. It's Peter's first day. And so it had to sort of start with Peter and it had to end with Peter. And again, he's the sort of emotional lens of Mr. Williams' lesson that he kind of leaves behind. And Alex Sharp, who plays him, is extraordinary and really very simply and very sort of subtly was able to carry what is really difficult, because once Mr. Williams is gone, we kind of are left with Peter. You know, he's the sort of, he has to pick up the emotion of the film and carry the sort of flashback structure of it, and he did that.
He's also the audience lens, like we're able to get into the story through
his optimism, and, you know, he thinks he can solve County Hall in 2 weeks. And so it was just, yeah, it was a very clever. I think in the original film that character is a lot smaller. Also, the original film is an hour longer than ours, so we had to find a ways of tightening it.
You alluded to the opening sequence, which is absolutely stunning. Can you tell us about arriving to the title sequences?
Late night YouTubing. I knew that I kept trying different things. I was going to do postcards at one point. I was going to animate postcards of London, and then literally YouTubing Pathé footage, I found this extraordinary collection of footage from London in 1952, and brought it to the edit suite, and we put it in, and I started playing around with the titles, and we spent a couple of weeks just sort of fiddling, the editor and I, Chris Wyatt. And then I remember showing it to Sandy, because obviously at this stage I had realized to show everything to Sandy. And she came to a screening, and I sort of said to her, like, oh, I've got this really exciting title sequence I've invented. And she's like, oh, that sounds fun. And then it starts, and she leans over to me, and she's like, you put a sequence with people in costume in the start of the film. What happens when it cuts to our footage? It'll show me up. I was like, Sandy, just keep watching. Because if you notice that that footage of those people and what Sandy did, it's almost exact. I mean, you would not know the difference.
Bill, he mentions Sandy Powell, which is Academy Award winning, one of the greatest costume designers in history. And she dresses you. Tell us about you know, working with Sandy and the outfit that you wear, which you never change, by the way.
Yeah, I like having one costume. I like it because I have a tidy mind, and it just means it's kind of the office, and you go to work in that. Now, you don't have too many other decisions. But with Sandy, yeah, I mean, normally I would say, Sandy, I don't have the neck for these shoulders. Please, can we take the shoulders in? But when it's Sandy, then you remember it's Sandy Powell, and you go, oh, right. And she says everybody in 1953 had big, wide shoulders. So, you know, and that suit is probably older than I am, just a bit, probably. It's probably 100 years old. The bowler hat, which you might have noticed, takes some wearing. But
also it takes a while to make it as well, right?
You mean build a bowler hat?
The build.
Yeah, it's built like a crash helmet. If it's very, very tough. If a house brick fell from a very great height, you'd be fine. Honestly, it's the weirdest thing. How they caught on, I have no idea. And they really caught on. You had to have, if you were in a certain class, or if you were a white-collar worker, you had to have a bowler hat. I mean, it's so bizarre. It's as exotic as anything in any part of the world, you know. But luckily, it got stolen halfway through the picture, so thank you.
Now, Bill, when you go to, your tie is always, you know, pretty tight. And when you go to Brighton and you start drinking and you're singing with Tom Burke, I said, he's going to start loosening that tie. But you opt to not to loosen that tie. Can you tell us about that choice?
I can't. I don't even like standing near a man with a loosened tie. And I'm not even kidding. I mean, what's that about? You know, it's just like, it's so lame, you know. Give me a break, you know. Maybe Frank Sinatra, no one else. But yeah, no, it's like when people often say, you know, he's falling apart, therefore, you know, he should dress down. No, they don't. People dress up. And anyway, he would never loosen his tie in public. You know, my father would never have loosened, for instance, you know, would never have loosened his tie in public. It just was never going to happen. You know?
And is your dad an influence on Mr. Williams?
I'm not playing my dad, but my dad was almost, not quite, but contemporaneous with Mr. Williams, and he was a subscriber to, he believed in, he was a believer, and his enthusiasm for manners went beyond their strategic value. They weren't, you know what I mean? They weren't simply, you know, they weren't tactical. He believed in them as a thing of beauty, and as something that was desirable in the world. He couldn't bear, yeah, so anyway, the answer to your question is, sorry, talk about my father. My father's name was Alfred Nighy, and I just want to say it out loud in Santa Barbara, so there you go.
Yeah. Oliver, working with Jamie Ramsey, your director of photography, can you tell us about how you guys arrived to the look? I love the light and shadows, the deep shadows in the photography.
Yeah, it's, you know, the real fun for me was just being able to pore over. I used to be a photographer in my previous existence, so that's kind of the obsession that I have, is the picture always. Most directors, they say it's production design, but I'm always obsessed with the photographer. And so there was lots of photographs I was looking at and sort of noticing top shots, lots of shots of people.
Yeah, bird's eye view shots. You do quite a lot of those in this film.
So it's like, okay, we're going to steal that and start to do a lot of those, and then, you know, started looking at sets and going, okay, can we put a crane outside of Waterloo Station? And everyone's like, absolutely not. And then slowly they say maybe, and yes, and so we could do that, and outside County Hall. And Jamie and I sort of had that crane every day, because we sort of would always go, can we do this from above? And the look of it was...
If you don't mind me interrupting, so that bird's eye shot, the top shot, what was your idea behind that? It's very powerful, but I'd love to hear your insight.
It's, you know, it was this idea of this rat race of people going to work, of the sort of, it's a very German expressionist kind of attitude as well to photography, but, you know, it's usually scenes of these Londoners coming out of stations or crossing streets, or Bull coming out of County Hall. It was this idea of the machinery and the sort of the structures, these human structures of organization, like overpowering and overwhelming people. And having these kind of ants, and so it was in my way of kind of telling. And then the other way I would do it was to kind of be very low and show people's feet and people's legs as these sort of cut-up abject objects in these big architectural spaces. And London is very, you know, we did a lot with County Hall. We actually shot this film in County Hall, which was quite extraordinary. And so I was able to really use that building a lot. And then in terms of the lighting and color, you know, I wanted to make the start of the film, particularly in the office, I wanted it to be a film in black and white, another way of kind of celebrating the original. So we have that set is completely black. The walls of the office are completely black, which, of course, for Jamie was like, how dare you, because black sucks up all the light. And it's like, it gets better. All the actors will be in gray, brown, black, and dark blue. And he's like, wow, that's even more cruel. And then the only person that's in white is Amy. Amy actually wears white shirts in the office, and all the paperwork is the only other highlight color in that office. So it was meant to be this monochrome experience, and then as the story continues, Amy is meant to be sunshine, so she starts wearing yellow, and her another Sandy Powell anecdote, I sort of kept saying to Sandy, she's sunshine, and then I was standing on the set one day talking to Amy, and her earrings were sunflowers.
Yeah.
Really tiny, which you might never see, but that's the Sandy Powell detail.
When you get to Brighton, you mute the palettes, and it reminds me of Edward Hopper. Can you tell us about And I'm sorry, Bill, that we're like
what's this
weirding
about?
out. We're like being film weirdos here.
Weirdos, Neville.
I'll be in my trailer.
Absolutely, yes. Edward Hopper is such an important painter and sort of photographic kind of inspiration, and you have to be very careful with Hopper to not overdo it. But I just knew that I had to do this one thing, which is when Bill's sitting in that cafe, and we meet Tom Burke, and we sort of pan over to Bill. There was just I'd seen this location, and I just knew that there was the potential for a Hopper-esque sort of feeling, and Jamie and I really obsessed about it, washing out the windows, creating this very white palette with Bill's bowler hat and black suit being the kind of pop. But those are the real fun things about having made Living. We just had so much opportunity to play because it's period, but I was trying to do period as a construction, so not being sort of completely always accurate and kind of just being a filmmaker, I guess.
And Bill, speaking of Brighton, the sequence with Tom Burke, which he's terrific in the film, by the way. It's in particular the singing. Tell us about shooting that sequence for you.
Well, there's always something on the schedule that freaks you out more than anything else on the schedule. There's always one bit where you think, well, I almost certainly can't do that, and I'm not being cute. That's and then that was one of those. But it worked. It was a good day. We had a good day, and it was. And I didn't think about it too much, beforehand, because otherwise I just freaked myself out. I just took it. I went to work and just kind of allowed it to creep up on me. And having Tom Burke there, who was a great friend of mine, was a very great was a great asset, and I was very grateful for that. Singing, it's like when you go to if you're trying to keep it together at a funeral for somebody you cared for, everything's fine until they ask you to sing, and by the second line of "Hey Jude," you're in pieces. You know what I mean? There's something about singing that just unlocks it. It's just unbearable, where you can keep it together, talking and doing everything else. Once the music starts, and it's the act of actually singing. I remember saying to a professional singer friend of mine once, how do you keep it together when you're singing sad songs or when you're singing something powerful and sad? And he said, it's a problem, it's a real problem. You have to really kind of just pull it back. But other than that, it was, and that song, I didn't know at the time, but was very important. Mr. Ishiguro said that he and his wife, it's a very important song for them. And it's kind of, I don't know if it's their song, but it's one of their songs. And she is Scottish, Lorna is Scottish, and it's a Scottish ballad. It was, it was a good day.
I mean, Bill sang that song about, 40 times. But I remember each time you sang it, because I would have to walk through the crew to go and talk to you, and then the crew would be crying, and I was like, okay, they'll cry for about 5 takes, and then they'll all start like drinking tea. But particularly our makeup artist would not stop crying every single time.
Tell us about casting, Oliver, casting Emmy Lou Wood.
Yes, we were still in lockdown. I was in South Africa and received, a large batch of tapes, the first real big batch, watching it, and then sort of got to Amy quite quickly. She was at the beginning, and sort of go, oh, there she is. That's definitely Margaret. And then you watch all the others, and then you sort of go back to the producers, going, I definitely think it's that person. And they all go, yeah, it is that person. Maybe you should meet her. Maybe we should call her back. And I was like, no, we don't have to. We can just, we can go with it. And they were like, no, call her back, and met her. And I was so naive in the sort of systems of this that on the call that I had with her, I was like, you've got the part. I'm so excited to work with you. And she was like, and then my agent called me. She was like, did you just offer that part to that actress without telling anyone? I was like, I did. And then thankfully everyone agreed. And she is extraordinary.
She is fantastic. And you have such great rapport, Bill, with her. Did you guys meet prior to starting shooting? And
we had lunch. Yeah.
We had a lunch. Yeah. We had lunch. We had lunch. We had lunch. It was fine. No. She was just great. She was dreamy to work with, and it was. We didn't have to. you know, all her preparation and mine had taken place elsewhere, as it should be, and we came together, and it just worked out. You know, she's exemplary, and she's wonderful to be around, and she's like that. You know, she is. I mean, it's not. You know, the dynamic between Mr. Williams and Margaret is not. You know, it wasn't a million miles away from the dynamic between she and I, and as much as that she has great vitality, and she is, you know, she is very exciting to be around. You know, she's straightforward and decent, and it's kind of thrilling, and so you know, it was wonderful to work with her.
Oliver, I read that you created a backstory to the characters. You know, tell us about that, and I'd love to hear Bill's response to the backstory.
Yes, it's something I've always done. I always like to write. I'm actually doing it right now for the TV show I'm about to start directing. Is to write in very detailed backstories for all the actors, not as a certainty, but as like a conversation starter. And I wrote for everyone else, but actually for Mr. Williams, I wrote one and I sent it to Ishiguro because I knew that he would have details on that he wanted to get right. And one of the things I sort of struggled with was I was trying to work out what Mr. Williams's education would have been and what his schooling would have been. And Ish was amazing at kind of fleshing all of that out. And then I think we sent it to you, and you definitely read it, right?
It went into the recycling bin.
No, I read it. Do you want to know my reaction? My reaction was I was deeply impressed that someone had gone to this much, you know, trouble. I don't generally have a backstory particularly. You know, I'm lucky. I work with a level of writing where most of the information I need is in the text. I don't, you know, you know, but I'm not against any of that. And I was very impressed by the fact that Oliver had done that. But the big thing in terms of this part, and a lot of English parts, is because the bonkers cast, and I say the word cast rather than class, the caste system in England is so complicated and so nuanced, and there are so many kind of, you know, versions of class expressed. So I really need to know precisely what it is, which depends on, you know, which school you went to, or, you know, those kind of things. Or, so that was my major concern, and that helped a great deal because it gave me pinpointed exactly where he stood in the preposterous list of, you know, poshness.
Mm-hmm. Oliver and Bill, when I saw this film in Telluride, I said to myself, this is the perfect movie for this time, where people are so caught up with their cell phones and the internet and Instagram and TikTok and not being present. Did you, when you were making the film, were you aware of the timeliness, the need for a film like this to remind us to be present?
Absolutely. I mean, we started this film before COVID, and then we sort of, you know, it went through COVID, and it became probably more specific because of that. For me personally, when I was sort of approached to make this, my thinking is always, what do I have to say about this subject? Do I have anything to add? And for me, this movie became a story about, you know, death affirming life. And I didn't know much about death. I had to really interrogate for myself, like, what is my relationship with death, and what do I feel about it? And COVID really kind of honed that in, because I also lost a lot of people close to me because of COVID. And I think that became my sort of drive. I wanted this movie to be a warm embrace to an audience. It was kind of the want of the film was to be something that made you feel good, but in a weird way, it is about a man dying. What do you think, Bill?
I was very happy there listening to you. What do I think? What was the question? No, hang on, I've got it. Have I got it? Yes. A lot of it was to do, it was framed, as Oliver says, by COVID, and as was everything else, obviously, and we'd all been through that. And it wasn't over yet, because it was in the middle of it, really. And and everyone had been, had to, the cliche became, you had to fall back on that which was evidently the most important thing, and it was relationships and friends and family and, and human relations. And I was very moved by it. It was the first thing I'd done since COVID. And I was back on a film set, and I was working with people, some people I'd known all my life, or most of my life. And I was very, very touched by it and very moved by it. Just the fact of us being back and doing this reckless thing. And I didn't know that we were doing, I don't think I think in those terms. I didn't think we are doing a timely thing, but I'm very grateful that it's turned out
And,
to be the case.
and Bill, we've adored you for years. You're one of our favorite actors, and the fact that you were giving this great role, how do you feel about the reaction that people have shown after?
Well, I'm deeply, deeply touched by it, and it's very important to me. And I'm very grateful to Oliver because he's done something very, very special. He's, he's a brilliant man, and I'm not just trying to deflect it from myself. It's true, And as he says, everyone we worked with were, we had an extraordinary group of people. But yeah, it's marvelous, that we were #1 across the nation in the UK for a while, and nobody carries a gun and nobody takes their top off. And I volunteered to take my top off, but he wouldn't have it. Well, I did take my top. He said, "Put your shirt back on." But no, sorry, it's a terrible joke. That did actually happen to me once. I took off my clothes for a part, and the director said, "Bill, can you please put your clothes back on?" And there was a very pretty girl standing, while he said it, there was a very pretty girl, one of the actresses, standing there, and she heard it, and after the director had gone away, she said, "Do you think he asked you to put your clothes back on because your body isn't good enough?" I said, "Yeah, I think that's probably why." You know what I mean? Anyway, sorry, that's got nothing to do with anything. But it's true.
Well, the two of you are a treasure, and thank you for being here.
Absolutely.